sculptural work. It's got all these branches that arch up like this, and it's got this huge canopy of leaves up on top, and it's very attractive that way. But if I wanted to cut it back, well, if I wanted to do what needs to be done with the boxwood on the front of the house, then what I would do is that multi-step or multi-stage pruning, so to speak. Does that make sense to everybody? Yes, sir.
Does that include with gusters, that three-step process?
Absolutely.
Perfect.
Absolutely. Yes,
what if you only have one branch to begin with?
Lop it off and hope for the best. So funny, I was flying back from California. We were at a gift market in San Francisco and then visited some nurseries out there, and got one of these Southwest Airlines flight attendants with a sense of humor, which I always enjoy. And this lady was so funny. She gave the usual safety spiel as you're getting ready to take off, and then she finishes up by saying, for those of y'all that were listening, we thank you for paying attention. For those of you that weren't, good luck. If you only got one stem, cut it back and good luck. Yes, ma'am.
She asked a question I have that's fairly just me. I have a bay tree that is about 5 feet tall now. I planted it like that, and it's just the one.
Okay. Is it getting good sunlight from all around? Okay.
Can I cut it?
You can cut it back, and it will normally branch.
Do I want it?
That's up to you. I mean, I've seen beautiful bay trees grown as what we would call topiaries, with one stem and then a big bunch of foliage at the top. If I wanted it to branch high, I just take the tip of it off. If I wanted it to branch medium, I cut it off here. If I wanted it lower, I cut it down lower.
I just want it for the bay leaves.
It's up to you. It's whether you want a bay leaf tree or a bay leaf shrub.
Cutting it back rather than letting it.
It'll make it bushier, and you won't have to climb as high to harvest the leaves. I think probably the best answer to your question is going to be when it's important to do it. If you're cutting, if you have no choice but to take most of the leaves off, would you want to cut it in the middle of the winter when you're going to wait 3 months for new foliage to appear? Or would you want to cut it when it's going to come back into growth almost immediately? In the case of your bay and whatever plant you're speaking of, I would cut it now or even in a couple more weeks so that it won't go without leaves for a long period of time. I'd cut it knowing that it's going to come right back out. Yes, sir?
Crepe myrtle that has been let grow into a tree.
I'll cover crepe myrtles in just a second. And that's the way most people prune crepe myrtles is what we call crepe murder. And that's not what I want you to do. Yes, ma'am?
Oleanders?
Oleanders are a plant which blooms on both old and new wood. If you prune oleanders now, you're taking off probably 2/3 of the bloom, but you'll still get some blooms this summer. To me, the best time to prune oleanders is let them put on that first heavy bloom, which is usually going to be about the 1st of May, and then prune them immediately afterwards. Yes?
Okay, when you're cutting back like with this form, if you wait for the new growth, does all this have to be done like before, like mid-February or whatever, or like right now?
The new growth's going to start on these plants in about 2 weeks.
And so what's the latest you can keep doing that?
Until the new buds really start coming out. And
All
if
year
you're
long?
doing it in several stages, then you can do it all year long.
Okay.
I'm going to come back to plants in the middle. We talked about very young plants and very overgrown plants. Come back to plants in the middle next. But yes, ma'am.
How do I trim back overgrown Duranta?
Duranta is one of those things that most years will freeze to the ground. Since it didn't, cut it back to the point you want it to branch. You don't have to prune it at all, but if you want to limit the size, cut it back to the point you want it to branch out. Yes?
I guess on a Japanese yew, when they start out small, same concept, you should trim
If
it
you want them to
one
branch
way.
from the base, yeah, keep pruning them while they're young to make them branch. Yes?
I have a very overgrown, I call it yellow plumbago.
Thrialis.
And the 3-step pruning that you described is good for that. How tall will it really get?
If it doesn't freeze, probably 6 or 8 feet.
Oh, it's about there.
Yeah. It actually being a plant that typically freezes back more, you can get the whole thing back if you wanted to, but I'd wait a week or so to do it, so it's going to be without leaves for a minimum period of time. Yes?
About 5 years ago, I got a very large coffee pot, and in it, my friend had put a bush, and I don't even know what it was.
Okay.
And so I planted it way out the back corner, and it grew. Really grew. Now it's about 20 feet. Now I can identify it as a loci.
Okay.
And in the center of this very large coffee pot was an oak tree. In the center of the roots and the base of this loci is this tree struggling, and it's way skinny, sticking its head up above the loci. And I'm figure out who's gonna win here. If I trim the loquat, I can't cut the bottom out of the loquat without really killing off the roots of the oak. I'd like the oak to be the winner here. I don't know how to cut.
Well, prune the top of the loquat so the oak gets more light. The problem that we're worried about, and the same problem we worry about with plants getting too big in a small pot, is girdling roots going round and around, and you've got a trunk that's trying to expand, you've got roots that are trying to grow larger, and they can literally surround and strangle the trunk. I've seen mature trees die from girdling roots that eventually caught up. And you know, this is the tree trunk right here, but down at the base they left it in a small pot too long, and those roots did this. Now the roots are this big around, they're encroaching on the tree trunk, and they're literally strangling it. So I can't tell you whether or not the roots of the loquat are wrapped around to the point they're going to strangle that oak tree. But probably the best thing to do is to trim the top of the loquat, let them fight it out, and see who wins.
If where the oak is up and it gets the sun, it's putting out really pretty leaves.
Oh, I'm sure.
So
Yeah, that's the purpose. And the plant knows where the sun is, and that's where it'll put out the leaves. So right now the oak's healthy, but we don't know what's going on below ground level. So it's going to be wait and see.
I don't think it was in the pot too long. It's not like it sat there for long. It was just transported to my house.
It's just going to be the question, are the roots doing this, strangling? And I mean, you'd almost have to cut the loquat down and expose the lower 2 feet of the trunk, you know, a foot below ground and a foot above ground, to see whether there's any strangling going
The
on.
loquat is as thick as 2 men's wrists. I mean, it's
Actually, it would be surgery. Talk to Dr. Rowland, he does surgery on people, maybe he'll do your tree for you. But,
Can loquats grow as a tree?
sure, and we're going to talk about, when we talk about crepe myrtles, you can have them tree form or bush form. Was there one more question before we go on to plants of a nice size? Yes.
Well, I have bicolor irises. How do you prune those?
You really don't have to at all. If anything, you may want to thin them out periodically.
Do they have the old brown?
The old things you just almost have to go through stem by stem, leaf by leaf, and cut them off. That's one thing with bicolor or butterfly iris, with monkey grass, with liriape, Ophiopogon, things like that. Anytime you cut a leaf on those plants, it's going to have a brown end on it. So you cut off the brown end, and now you have a brown end here. So you cut it here, and now you have a brown end here. If you're going to cut it off at all, cut it all the way to the ground and let the new growth come out. If your liriape has too many browns in and looks ugly, mow it off to ground level and let the new growth come out. But with that, the leaves that don't look good, take them all the way out. The old bloom stems, just go down individually and trim them out. And it's very interesting. It's kind of like cutting back aspidistra. You've got an ugly leaf here, and you've got a beautiful leaf here, and you want to cut out the ugly one. So you reach down to the bottom and you go click. And the good leaf falls over. The brown leaf is still there. It's just a matter of being as careful as you can, but it happens to everybody.
But you can just cut down to the ground?
Oh yeah, and let them come back out. But typically, if they've gotten that overgrown and have that many ugly leaves, what you do is cut them into 4 pieces and plant one back into that hole and take the other 3 somewhere else.
You're talking about
Trim
the
it back.
whole plant itself,
Yeah.
thinning it out,
Yeah,
dividing it.
cutting it in many pieces. That's strictly with butterfly or bicolor iris or things that grow in similar fashion. Yes, ma'am.
Is that why the variety sometimes I've had mine for years and now it just kind of lays down rather than going up? It needs to be thinned out.
If you thinned it out, you would have more new growth coming out from the base, which would be more attractive. Let me go on. One more question, then we'll talk about normal sized plants. Yes, sir.
Shrimp plant.
Shrimp plant, you can cut it all the way to the ground, let it come back out, or you can cut it not at all. It never seems to get really overgrown. It just tends to expand from the base and put on more growth and more flowers. So I rarely ever prune shrimp. About every 5 years it gets cold enough to freeze it completely. I cut it off the ground level and let it come back out.
Smooth leaf salvia.
Same thing. Same thing.
Basically anything that normally freeze back, do whatever you want to with it.
Do whatever you want to with it. If you want it big, leave it alone. If you want it small, play Mother Nature and freeze it back with your pruning shears. Okay. Okay. Who?
Turk's cap.
Turk's cap? It's up to you. Cut it to the point you want it to branch. It's going to bloom mainly on new growth, so do it now. Now, what about plants that have grown to a size that you like, and you like them the way they are? How much should you prune them? It's real easy. take off 1 year's worth of growth. Look at the branches that are on that plant and follow it back down to the point that it was pruned last year. If it grew out too much, you didn't cut it back enough last year. If it didn't grow out enough,